Hello, it's Amy. I'm back again with the Memoirs of the Princesse de Ligne, and as we did the other day, we completed Volume 1, and we are moving on to Volume 2. And so let's see what Volume 2 has to offer us. It seems just a tiny bit slimmer than Volume 1. And so our title page. And I think this title page here is absolutely gorgeous with the red. So Volume 2, the matching volume for the 1887 edition. And we have our table of contents. And it looks like we are continuing on with Part 2, which was begun in Volume 1, because we start with Chapter 4 here, presumably Chapter 4 of Part 2. And so I would assume we're going to get some more history here, rather than words from the Princesse de Ligne's own writings. So let's see how far we get. Chapter 4... Okay, Chapter 4 is not quite as long as it first looks, but we'll see how far we get here. The Prince Bishop at last decided to start for Paris. He had hardly arrived when he received a visit from Madame de Palis, who informed him of his niece's inclinations and explained to him the progress of affairs. The bishop earnestly requested to see the Princesse de Ligne Luxembourg herself, but at that moment she was staying with Madame de Brionne at her country place in Memoirs. Madame de Palis at once resumes her pen. The Prince Bishop, Madame, is always inquiring whether you have returned. He is extremely desirous to have the honor of seeing you, and I should be very glad if you could seriously discuss the matter with him. Occasions on which I can prove to you my zeal and entire devotion will not be wanting with so vacillating a mind. You will be able to say through me anything you please. I will see to everything and render you a faithful account of what happens. But it seems to me that we must settle between ourselves what is to be the point of departure. He has referred several times to the question of settlements, especially with regard to the present. Would it not be better to present him with a copy of the deed of property? It would hurry up the transaction and be a wise measure. The Prince de Salm's agents are very active. He constantly alludes to him, and he listens to my replies as if they were quite new to him. He goes on confiding to my ear all the proposals that are made to him. We have 3 fresh rivals who, for the present, however, give me no anxiety. The desired explanations at last arrive from Brussels in the following letter. The Princesse de Ligne de Liechtenstein to the Princesse de Ligne Luxembourg. I trust, Princess, you do not doubt the tenderness of my feelings towards you. The gratitude I now owe you can only increase it. I have the honor to enclose the paper concerning Monsieur de Ligne's property. For the last year he has put all his affairs into my hands, and as I sign everything and collect all the revenues, and Monsieur de Ligne even gives me the receipts for the money he draws from the estates, I can guarantee the exactness of the document. I am too sure of my husband's affection for you, Princess, and the confidence he has in your judgment, not to feel certain that he will agree to any arrangement you may choose to make for his son. I beg to entreat you, Madame, in case you should think an income of 25,000 livres not sufficient for the present, to fix the sum yourself. For I only require 1 more year to settle the affairs of our house, public opinion having kindly reported that they were in a much more confused state than I found them to be. I can promise you to honor any arrangements and liabilities that you will undertake for our young people. All they will have to do when they draw their income every 3 months will be to sign their names. I have made it a rule in business to consider as sacred the dates on which income or pensions fall due. The affection I bear towards my children, leading me perhaps to overlook their faults, it would ill become me to praise our son, but I must believe the testimony of those who knew him at Strasbourg during several years. And at the present moment we have every reason to be satisfied with the character he bears in the army. Pray, therefore, do not relax your kindness towards him, and let your efforts conduce to his happiness. You will also be contributing towards mine, for to see him settled and to be surrounded by my children will be my greatest joy. Receive, Princess, the assurance of my deepest respect and esteem, etc., etc. The letter had a wonderful effect on the uncle, but did not move his niece. The young lady, writes Madame de Pally, is infatuated with Monsieur de Salm. He has some emissary about her, whom we do not know, and who demolishes beforehand all we can say against him. Even the Count de Horn's name has been brought forward as an honour on account of the regent's phrase about him. And we have a footnote here telling us who the Count de Horn is. A connection of the regent through his mother, the Princess Palatine, was condemned to death for murder. The family implored his pardon, appealing to the regent on the ground of relationship. When I have bad blood, the regent coldly replied, I have it drawn, and the pardon was refused. It is probable that they boasted to Helene of the connection between the Horn and the Orleans families, without mentioning the Count's crime. The good uncle feels his own weakness and carefully endeavors to hide it. He has agreed to everything with me, and as I have been fortunate enough to persuade him, he fancies I shall have the same success with his niece, as if they were in the same frame of mind. Today he is going to use all his influence, and at the same time inform her of the visit he wishes me to make, and of the entire trust he desires she should have in me. I shall lend myself to all his wishes, and shall have the honour of sending you a report of this interview. Receive, I pray, etc. The uncle did not meet with the slightest success in his efforts to overcome his niece's resistance. Madame de Pally was obliged to confess it to her correspondent. There is one point, madame, on which I think you will be obliged to give way. The bishop asserts that he can only overcome his niece's passionate wish to be married in Paris by pledging his word that she shall spend 3 winters there under your guidance, so as to get accustomed to the fashionable world. He appears to attach great importance to this promise, for he feels the great advantage it would be to his niece. You still have time, madame, to think over this matter, for we can discuss the other points in the meantime. I will tell you what they are when I see you. The Princess de Ligne kept her nephew informed of all these negotiations. As for the prince's father, he was still detained with the army, waiting for peace to be signed. Prince Charles wrote a short, cold note to his aunt in which he did not even allude to his marriage. My dear aunt, although peace has been declared, the Congress is not yet over. My father is very displeased at it. He is still in a wretched village, feeling very dull with nothing to do. He will certainly go to Paris as soon as he can. I envy him the pleasure he will have in seeing you, my dear aunt. Allow me to assure you from time to time of the feeling of affection and respect with which I remain all my life, etc., etc. The coolness the prince displayed will be easily understood when we learn that he already felt for a friend of his childhood, a love which was never completely effaced. But accustomed as he was absolutely to respect the paternal, or rather the maternal will, it never entered his mind for one moment not to obey. His mother had eagerly agreed to their cousin's plans. Helene's large fortune, the isolated position of the young girl, which would tend to make her adopt her husband's family as her own, had quite won over the princess, who ignored or pretended to ignore her son's secret affection. She therefore persevered in her efforts, hoping to succeed through the object in view, though it was not easy to attain. The Bishop of Wilna had been won over to the de Lignes, and had many a hard battle to fight, for an unforeseen circumstance had strengthened Helene's resolution not to leave Paris. Her friend, Mademoiselle de Lauragues, had married the Duke Auguste de Armberg, cousin of the de Lignes, who, like him, resided for part of the year at the court of Brussels. The young duchess returned to Paris for some time, and at once informed her former companions at the Abbaye aux Bois. She had heard of Prince Charles' proposed marriage, and gave Helene a most gloomy description of life in Brussels. The latter immediately repeated this to her uncle, making the picture several shades darker. The poor bishop did not know who to listen to. In the midst of his perplexities, he determined to dispatch the Abbé Bedeau, who was always at hand, to Belle-Île, giving him instructions to confer verbally with the Princess de Ligne on the delicate subject of a residence in Paris, as well as the money question. He was allowed great latitude on this latter point, and accordingly set off. Madame de Palais lost no time, and again wrote to the Princess de Ligne, Luxembourg. "We have had news of the envoy, madame, and we hear he is much pleased with everything, but he sends word that Madame la Princesse de Ligne will not hear of a 3 years' residence in Paris." The bishop appeared to me very much disturbed at the effect this would have on his niece, as she had always held to this condition. You know there is nothing more difficult to overcome than the fancies of a young person, and unfortunately she has been confirmed in this one by all that Madame de Armberg de Lorgas has told her. The abbé will arrive perhaps today. I shall be there, and we will first work upon the uncle, so as to make him work upon his niece. Monsieur de Salm will not give way. He has sent his picture to his friend at the convent, and she has invited the Princess Helene to a collation given in a room of which this portrait forms the chief ornament. I was at the opera with a lady who is much interested in this fine gentleman, and she said, "What does it signify whether you are a scamp or not when you have a name and a large fortune? Look, for instance, at so-and-so, etc. God forbid that such morality should enter the head of our prelate and his niece. In the meantime, I amused myself last night by quietly challenging my free-spoken young friend to tell me all the naughty stories about this charming prince." The good bishop bore it with a slightly embarrassed air, which quite amused me. "I shall have the honour, madame, to give you an account of the envoy's return, and of all its consequences. I beg you not to be impatient, and to rely on my zeal and my intense desire to do all that is agreeable to you. Receive, etc." It was not long before the abbé returned, and though he had not succeeded in obtaining the promise of a residence in Paris, he had done much to push the matter forward. He brought magnificent fruit and flowers to the young princess, and in the description he gave of the most regal magnificence of the place, he neglected none of the details which were likely to charm and flatter her vanity. He had granted handsome pecuniary conditions, and the princess on her part had seemed disposed to accept the marriage contract proposed by the abbé. Madame de Palais to the Princess de Ligne, Luxembourg. "All is going on wonderfully well, madame. You will find the prince and his envoy very well satisfied. At dinner we had a melon, and peaches were sent to the Princess Helene. I proposed the health of the giver, but they will tell you the rest. I am rejoiced at the position of affairs. The abbé may have every possible fault, but he confirms me in my opinion that one can do nothing with fools and everything with intelligent people. The young princess is converted, and her good uncle, agreeing to the abbé's expedient, says it will cost me 30,000 livres a year more to make my niece happy. I will do it, madame, if only you are satisfied." Princess de Ligne, Luxembourg, wrote to her cousin to give her this good news, and to urge her to come to Paris as soon as possible. But she was in no hurry, and, like a prudent mother, wished above all to settle everything relating to the income and household arrangements of the future young couple, for whom she dreaded certain temptations, from which she herself had suffered. She again sent her steward to Paris, with 2 letters, one of which was a confidential one to her cousin. 19th January 1779. "I dispatch you my steward, princess. He will have the honor of handing you this letter, and I have instructed him to carry out exactly whatever you are kind enough to order. The prince arrived at Vienna on the 5th of June. I therefore think he will soon be home again, in which case I should only go to Paris with him, or even a couple of days later, if I can possibly avoid going before. In any case, princess, I shall await your orders. I reserve myself the pleasure of assuring you personally of all my gratitude. I have never doubted the success of anything which you were good enough to take in hand. As the young people will not have to receive, and as the ordinary expenses of the household cannot possibly absorb all their income, I fear that too large a fortune may be hurtful to them, and lead perhaps to gambling or other extravagances, which would do them harm, and which they would always consider themselves obliged to increase in proportion to their income, especially when they will come into their respective fortunes. I look at this matter from a mother's point of view. Pray, do not let it go beyond the family. The The Princess de Ligne Luxembourg told the bishop of her cousin's wise advice, but no attention was paid to it. The Congress of Teschen was over, and the Prince de Ligne was returning home slowly, for he always found much to delay him on the road. We will not inquire into the nature of these delays. He, however, found sufficient time to write a few lines from Vienna to his cousin and to the Bishop of Wilna, which he had neglected doing for the last 2 months. To the Princess de Ligne Luxembourg. I am told, Princess, that thanks to your kindness, all is going on well. Also, that you have done me the honor of writing to me. I have not received anything. They say I must write to the bishop. I beg you will give him the enclosed letter. If you have any command to give me, address them to the post office at Munich. I shall find them in passing through. All the information I receive from Poland appears to coincide with our views. I place myself at your feet, Princess, and beg to assure you that my gratitude is equal to my tender and respectful attachment. Le Prince de Ligne. A few days after the receipt of this letter, they had agreed upon all points. A draft of the settlement was drawn up, and the Princess de Ligne and her son announced their arrival. In spite of the very small inclination the young prince felt for this marriage, he experienced a certain curiosity to see his future bride. As for Helene, she was far more interested in her outfit, her presents, and her diamonds than in her husband. Among other things, she had been promised certain grenadoles, and we have a footnote, grenadoles, large diamond earrings that were worn with the court dress, and diamond bracelets of wonderful beauty, old family jewels. And she was most impatient to see them, and she was in a great fright lest they should be left behind at Brussels. And that's very on brand for a teenage girl. She just wants to see, what she gets to wear, the jewels she gets to wear for these incoming grand occasions. Her future aunt undertook to explain this childlike anxiety to the wife of the steward, so that she might remind the princess to bring these precious trinkets. She answered as follows. On my return home, I found a letter from the princess announcing her immediate arrival and adding that she is bringing with her the grenadoles and the bracelets, so the Princess Helene need have no cause for anxiety. I shall have the honor of paying her my respects on Monday. We have also heard through Monsieur le Count Tasson that Monsieur le Prince de Ligne will reach Brussels at the latest on Monday. I hasten to apprise your highness of the fact, and beg she will accept the assurance of deepest respect, etc. The Princess de Ligne's first visit was to her cousin. She there found the Prince Bishop awaiting her arrival. After a long conversation and endless compliments on either side, it was settled that the bishop should escort the princess and her son to the Abbaye aux Bois. Helene, who had been warned the day before, was very much vexed at having to make her first appearance in her school dress, but no exception could be made to the rule. She went down to the parlour accompanied by Madame de Saint Delphine, and very soon perceived that the plainness of her dress did not prevent the prince from thinking her very pretty. Though she pretended to cast her eyes modestly down during the visit, she took care to see enough of her future husband to be able to say to her companions on returning, "He is fair, has a tall, slight figure, and resembles his mother, who is very handsome. He has a noble mien, but he is too serious, and there is something German about him." The prince's father arrived 3 days later. "I abandon Monsieur de Ligne to your indignation, princess," his wife writes to her cousin. "You may prepare her for his arrival, which will certainly be either today or tomorrow. It fills me with the greatest joy." The prince's father had his head completely turned by his future daughter-in-law, who did all she could to please him, intuitively feeling that he was the one with whom she could best sympathize. Having no family in Paris, it was decided that Helene's marriage should be celebrated in the chapel at the Abbaye aux Bois, to the great delight of the pupils. The bishop gave his niece an outfit worth 100,000 ukas. And we have a footnote here. The Princess Helene received as her marriage portion Mogliani, an estate with a residence and country houses, 2 palaces at Krakow and one at Warsaw. Prince Radziwill owed the Masalski family a sum of 1,800,000 Polish florins, inherited through Helene's mother. He had given them as interest 3 important estates, of which half the income belonged to Helene and the other half to her brother. The Prince Bishop promised to give and guarantee the Princess from her wedding day a clear income of 60,000 livres, payable in Paris, and to pay all their expenses in the event of their remaining in that city. On the other hand, the Prince de Ligne promised to give his son on his wedding day a revenue of 30,000 livres, and in addition to lodge the pair at Brussels or Bellol or Vienna in one of his palaces or residences. If they had any children at the end of 4 years, the prince promised to double the sum of money. So they were rolling in it. They were extremely wealthy. So she got an outfit worth 100,000 yukas. The wedding casket offered by the Lignes was provided by Leonard. The laces ordered at Brussels and Mechlin were real masterpieces of work. The jewels offered to Helene, besides the family diamonds and the famous grandoles, were chosen by herself at Barrières and Drays. She gave a trinket to each of her companions in the red class, and a magnificent luncheon with ices. And with ices are in italics, so I'm assuming that was, something very special. With ices, was given by the Prince Bishop to all the pupils, including the little Blues, who each received in addition a bag of sweetmeats. The marriage contract was signed at Versailles by their Majesties and the royal family the 25th of July, 1779. The wedding took place on the 29th at the Abbaye aux Bois. It is needless to add that Helene's nurse, Mademoiselle Bathilde Toutevoix, took part in the festivities. She adorned her pretty mistress to the very best of her ability, and the poor girl's head was so completely turned with joy that she even forgot her cockades. And we have a footnote here. She was in the habit of bedizing herself with them, and Helene does not forget to mention in her memoranda that on that day she forgot them. She came down to the parlour after the bride and modestly hid herself in a corner. Prince Charles approached her and slipped into her hand his wedding present, an annuity of 600 livres. Helene was much touched with his attention. I thanked him, she said, by a smile and pressure of the hand, the first I had granted him. The bride was led to the altar by her uncle and by the Marquise Wilpolska, who took the place of her mother. The Duchess de Choiseul, de Mortemar, de Chatillon, and de la Vallière, etc., were present at the ceremony. The young princess, exquisitely lovely in her bridal dress, fully satisfied the company by her decent attitude, which was full of feeling, style of that day. After receiving the congratulations of the brilliant assembly, Helene went up to her apartment to change her costume. But instead of returning immediately to the parlour, she quickly made her way to the choir chapel, where Madame de Rouchart was buried, and kneeling on the tomb of one who had been to her as a mother, she offered up to God her last girlish prayer. When she returned to the parlour, she was rather pale, and her eyes showed signs of tears, but at the gates of the Abbey a post-chaise drawn by 6 chafing horses was waiting, the postilions in the pink and silver livery of the prince being scarcely able to hold them. Helene, after a rapid farewell, was hurried into the carriage of her young husband, and they started at full gallop for Brussels. And so she is married and on her way to Brussels. And I have to say I quite enjoyed the description of her wedding and wedding attire. And I hope you enjoyed that as well. So we will be back next time with Chapter 5 of Part 2 here in Volume 2.